since I've been sober, like I have never applied for a job. It's almost like if you answer this calling a little bit, it's almost like sort of this like universal force kind of sweeps you up and you're just kind of like going along. You know, it's almost like where your higher power needs you to be, where the universe needs you to be. Yep. I don't know. But, you know, that's definitely my experience.
I'm Flindt Andersen, founder of PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need. I've been in recovery since 2001, and there isn't much I don't know about recovery. And my mission is to constantly tell the truth about addiction, to make the realities of addiction, recovery, and drug culture known, and to drive awareness and advocate change that ultimately saves lives.
And I'm Jason LaChance, a certified recovery coach with a passion for speaking with others and sharing their knowledge to help others seek recovery and maintain long-term sobriety. And this is the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, presented by PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need. Marsha Stone, of course, CEO and founder of Foundation Stone, co-author of the Rewired Workbook. Thank you for joining the founder of PAIN, Flindt Andersen, and myself, Jason LaChance, on Don't Hide the Scars.
Morning, Marsha.
Good morning, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And if my dog starts to bark, I'll just hop up, put him out to his little crate, and then I'll come right back. But otherwise, you have my full attention right now.
Are you broadcasting live from the she shed? I mean, that's a nice get up you got there.
Let me tell you something. So this is what I call the atrium. We bought this house about 7 years ago. And the guy, this is like blasphemy to me. The old owner had it set up as like a octagon, like an MMA kind of fighting thing. But it's beautiful and it's like all glass and it's almost like a bird cage kind of.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Really pretty, right off my bedroom. And so when COVID came, I turned this from kind of like my meditation space is what I use it for, and to meet other people in recovery and those kind of things. When COVID came, I decided to make it my home office, and it's turned out fantastic. And I mean, you know, we started this new company recently, and I said to the team, I was like, listen, I'll be here on Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays in the office. Otherwise, I'm in the she shed Monday and Friday, and you can find me here. And so this worked out really well. I mean, I always thought I was one of those people that couldn't work from home, but I actually do just fine.
Yeah.
It has its advantages some days.
That's right. That's right. It wasn't all bad.
Well, one of the things I want to dive right into with quickly, because Flindt and I talk about, especially as insurance companies are cutting actual treatment times to less and less and less, and it's ridiculous, especially those of us in recovery know what it takes. The importance of aftercare, and you're all about that. So that's really where I want to dig in and start with, and maybe even some of the fallacies that people have about aftercare. I know Flindt will speak often to a lot of the parents that he works with, like, my kid's been through treatment, they're cured. And it's no, doesn't work that way. Sorry.
You're so right. You know, I mean, I remember this was a long time ago. I was an attorney, and then I got sober in 2008 and kind of accidentally wound up working in the behavioral health field, fell in love with it. And I was doing like a talk, maybe, I don't know, now 10 years ago. And it was at like a behavioral health conference. And I said from the podium, from the microphone, auditorium, treatment is not a treatment for alcoholism and addiction. And it was like, you could have heard a pin drop, right? But what I meant was treatment, typically 30 days, 45 days, 90 days, if you're really lucky and have, you know, the right insurance and the right resources. That's to me like a physical separation from my number one symptom, which is drugs or alcohol, right? And what I do there is I kind of get detoxed, I get stabilized. I've got, you know, some great classes, understand sort of, you know, boundaries, codependency, the disease cycle. And I'm being facetious when I say understand. If you sat in like, you know, 2 45-minute lectures about that, but yet you've been, you know, addicted and codependent and had no boundaries your entire life. But in 30 days, like mom and dad are going to pick you up outside the treatment center and all will be well. Like, who the hell thought that up, you know? And we know the answer to that question, right? Someone who's never struggled with alcoholism or addiction. And, you know, part of my personal story was from 2002 to 2008, I was in and out of treatment, these short episodic kind of treatments. And what finally really changed everything for me was a long-term continuum of care, right? Yeah. And why did I go to a long-term continuum of care? Did I finally realize that's what I needed? Absolutely not. I mean, for me, it was like the Bar Association in Georgia and North Carolina kind of came together, and, they have a lot of power over my life. And so my license is suspended for 5 years. My mother had temporary custody of my children for a year. And so all of these things that were kind of like, the trappings of, the life, the picture perfect white picket fence life that I had built were removed from my life. And then they were in charge of my thinking. And they were saying, you will do this, or we will not give you back this, your kids, your career, et cetera. So what that looked like was obviously the treatment part that happens, inside of a treatment center, but followed by a very robust aftercare program and alumni program. And it was an all women's place in Atlanta, Georgia. I don't think it's open anymore, which is a shame, but it's called MAR. And I was in that treatment center for 7 months. And so when I left that and realized, like, what was the big difference? Was it just time? Time was a big part of it. But for me, it was almost like I had developed some type of spiritual muscle memory where my, old sort of go-to response, which is to lie, hide, sneak, all the things that we do, right? Those responses finally somehow had been a little bit interrupted within my, my neurotransmitters, right? My response system, my pleasure center. So I said all that to say, when I accidentally kind of got into the behavioral health field, the thing that I said right away was, I'm really going to focus on a long-term continuum of care, and I will really be an advocate for that and try to help people figure out how to make that work, right? When you think of resources, it's money and it's also time. And those are our two most important resources. So how do we fit something together that people can, after not too long, start to work part-time and, participate with their recovery and begin to take responsibility for their life and their recovery? And I've had I've been in this business for 14 years now. I was really, really early sobriety when I got into it, which I don't necessarily recommend anyway.
But, neither do we.
Neither do we.
This is what I say. I did not know enough to be as terrified as I should have been. And that was a real blessing. You know what I mean? Because now I'm like, how in the world did I navigate all that? I was like a baby, like a baby in life. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I didn't even want to start this, to be honest with you. I'm sitting at the Betty Ford Center in 2001 and, and everybody's sitting around the circle and everybody wants to be a damn drug counselor. And I'm going, just get me out of here, right?
Me too. I never thought about this.
God, no, that's the last thing I wanted, and then in 2008, somebody asked me to tell my story and then all of a sudden it started falling into place. And, and then we started this organization. I started in 2009 and, off to the races. But I also had 7 years of recovery under my belt, before I started it. And that was extremely important because starting any business, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, it doesn't matter. You're going to come up against walls and those walls are going to be tall and they're going to be thick, and if you don't have that, if you don't have some sort of I don't know, backbone, whatever you want to call it, chutzpah, to deal with that nonsense. Hell, that's a trigger and a trap right there, so.
Yes. I mean, I could not agree more. And I always use that caveat when I tell that story because, listen, I did not travel like the easiest path like you're describing. However, I will say this. I don't know if you can identify with this, but, I started working for Mark Houston here in Austin in 2009, September 13th, 2009. So I was, June, July, August, 16 months sober. And he wanted me to help him start a women's program. And so I did that. And that was the first one that I started, Mark Houston Recovery Women's Program. And then Mark died suddenly 6 months later. He had a massive heart attack out of the blue, young guy in his 50s. And I sort of negotiated this deal for this angel investor to come and buy the program because I'd fallen in love with the work. I was enjoying helping these women. All the feelings that you have. This is before I even went back and got like a drug counselor degree. This is just like a 12-step immersion program. Anyway, the angel investor bought the company. And then a few months later, he comes in and, throws me the keys to the front door and says, "You're the CEO now. Call me if you need me." And I was like, "What?" Like, I'm not a CEO. I'm a drunk lawyer. Like, I don't know how to run a business. If it wasn't for my paralegal, we would have all been, starvation dead a long time ago. But he was like, "Oh, don't, this is monopoly money." He's like a Texas oil and gas guy, so this is like nothing to him. He's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'll teach you everything you need to know." And that was a lie, because he never came back. Right. But what happened, right? What happened when you have personalities like y'all's and like mine, when those walls come and those things come up? I don't know. We just got this grit thing, and we just like say a prayer, Hail Mary, whatever you're going to do, and just jump right in. And I loved the work, right? I felt like that passion, that I never really felt before. I mean, I had a lot of fun being a lawyer. It's a real like ego kind of job. But this was like something I'd never experienced before. And I just fell in love with doing it. And at the beginning, only women. And I ended up buying that company from him and expanding it. And it was called BRC Healthcare. And we ended up, I did like an not angel investor. I did like an investor, like a private equity investor transaction a couple of years ago. And I had a 2-year contract and I worked that out. But then when I got done with that is when I started my new program, Foundation Stone, which I'm really excited about. And, it's funny, like I have all those memories and they're so good. Right. And I have, I think like when you get into the place where you're building something like long-term recovery, like long-term continuums, because we had sober houses. I had this idea to start these apartments, like these sort of sober communities with all of our alumni. And when those things started to work and come together, you guys know, like I can't even explain the feeling that you have, because it's something that's like that you could have utilized, right? That you needed when you were going through that part of your journey, and the opportunity to build that and avail that to other people that are struggling is like, it gives me goosebumps right now just talking about it.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised, top quality care with programs for detox, inpatient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living, support groups, and more. With 50 plus years of combined experience and sobriety, Flindt, Andersen, and Thelma Gatlin Wilson provide adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect, and a safe, comfortable environment. To begin the process of recovery, to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction, call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com.
I remember that there were so many people that because I'm born and raised in Fresno, without being arrogant, I know a lot of people, again, like all of us, were pretty outgoing. But I had all these people coming to me going, man, nobody wants to hear about addiction. Nobody's going to want to hear your story. Nobody's going to want to hear about this. Even back then,
it's a downer. It's a bummer.
It's a bummer. It's a downer. It's this. It's that. And I didn't even know what a podcast was. Okay, in 2009. But I'm talking to
nobody knew in 2009,
right? But
I don't think I did either. Yeah,
right. But my point here is that I was going to people that in the radio business, and because I knew all these people and said, hey man, why can't we do a show about this? Blah, blah, blah. And then the Purdue thing just exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'll tell you what, when Purdue exploded, that's when we exploded, because now I went full bore, balls to the wall. Okay. All in Purdue's butt and just talking about everything. And all of a sudden people in our area are going, wow, we really have this problem. I was speaking in schools when nobody was speaking in schools about opiates.
It is wild. It was wild to look back on that time now. And with knowing the type of data that was available, the research that had actually been done, that's what trips me out about the whole thing.
Yep.
And you're right. No one wanted to talk about it. And, I often talk a lot about too, when I was, I'm very grateful to the Bar Association for putting their foot on the neck of my disease. But it was at the time, there was no understanding,
None.
Recovery was not the new black. It was very punitive. And, listen, I have a whole shtick about that. Mine was handled a little bit differently because I'm a woman. And I believe that to be true, but not to that's not my, that's not my campaign, right? That's not my shtick. But just remembering all that evidence was there, all the studies had been done, all the pharmacy companies knew it, yet it was all hidden and ignored largely by the press and media. And God forbid you're a professional with a license that has a drug or alcohol problem, because to them, it was a moral dilemma. To them, I was a bad person. To them, I was, fill in the blanks, right?
Right.
And it was very painful. It wasn't helpful at all. But here's why I'm glad I went through that, because now I have that experience and I have that voice for how addiction and alcoholism are handled from the very beginning, and what kind of plan is put together for you is so important and so critical. And all the shame and all the guilt and all the nasty letters and all the beratement and listening to my clients, all of them, how I betrayed them. And I did, right? Like, I get it. But what I was trying to tell them, and what I say today, is, let me tell you something. No one was more ashamed of my behavior than I was.
Right.
Yeah.
You do not have to convince me that there was something just like, morally wrong with what I, like, we know that.
We know
right?
that. Right.
I mean, the whole
Thank
time, I mean, like, yeah, duh. But, I'm really grateful that I do believe things are changing. I think that people are way more interested in, people like you guys are like really taking, the ball and pushing it forward in that way. And that's so admirable. But we still got a long way to go, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because,
I mean, you were bringing up some points in there that it's like, just societally, the word I can get up, like, I don't know how to say it. How effing stupid are we that we don't see these continual trends? This has been going on since the late 1800s.
Right.
These same things, these same cycles. We had a gentleman on, Gerald Posner, who talked about writing on fentanyl, which ironically ended up, Penthouse was the only thing that would publish this 32 years ago.
Yeah.
32 years ago. It's like, these things are out there. We know they're out there. We continue to have a government that's just like, well, we'll give them a place not to be on the street, and that'll just fix it. And it's like,
Oh my God.
how stupid can we continue to be to this disease?
Well, look, I mean, look, we have all done I think, and I believe this, I believe this. We have all done a very, very good job over the last few years of getting the awareness piece out, right?
Yep.
You can't swing a dead cat in this country, okay, without hitting somebody, all right, that knows about the fentanyl epidemic. Okay.
True.
All right.
That's true.
We can hope.
No, let's just take what it is. It's out there. Okay.
Yeah.
What we haven't done is that we have not taken one step towards improving treatment.
Right.
We circumvent, we come back, we go over the top, we come around the left, we come around the right, thinking of ways almost to not help somebody via treatment. It's harm reduction, it's free needles, it's fentanyl test strips, it's whatever the hell it is. Okay.
Suboxone for life.
Right? Instead of just attacking the problem, like we talked about with Brock the other day, just having the people that actually make the decisions, have us that know, come in, ask our opinions on what works for the addict and what doesn't, right? Because we know what works, we know what doesn't work. We know there's no cure for this. So let's stop acting like there is, and let's stop using harm reduction techniques as treatment tools, because Narcan, fentanyl test strips, free needles are not treatment tools.
That's right. No, they're not. They're not. Well, you know what? They are devices to keep someone alive long enough to get to treatment. That's it. That's it. And I mean, I could not agree with you more. And, it's one of the things that's super frustrating to me. And I don't know if you guys know Dr. John Kelly. He's a pretty well-known and well-respected sort of studier of addiction and alcoholism. And I happened to be reading one of his papers one night, and I'm going to do a bad job paraphrasing this. So Dr. Kelly, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but this was what I read from the paper that you wrote, right? Not saying that this is what you wrote, and this is when I was really starting on this idea of this long-term continuum of care. And so he'd done all these studies about treatment, about everything. And, the question was, what are the two most important factors when you're talking about treating alcoholism and addiction, right? So my ears perk up. And here's the problem. It's not that sexy, right? I mean, the press, everybody wants like some kind of, like sexy new cure. It's not. Here's what he said. A long-term continuum of care that the client is bought into, right? So that's creating that community, a long-term continuum of care that the client is bought into, and some type of spiritual component. Yeah. It doesn't say AA, it doesn't say NA, it doesn't say not AA, it doesn't say Buddhism, whatever. But just think about that, what he said, because what are we missing in our society? Mm-hmm. Connection with others and with ourselves, right? Yeah. And if I think back to like what started me drinking, at the very earliest memories I have about drinking was like in high school. And everybody's weird and everybody's nervous, and you're going to go to a party and somebody snuck in a bottle of their dad's vodka, or, somebody's older brother had a fake ID and he's got a bottle of Boone's Farm, whatever. And you take a couple sips of that and all of a sudden you don't feel quite so awkward. And like, I feel like I can dance all of a sudden and like, yeah, this is good. Right. That too, from that memory to the very last time that alcohol ever touched my lips, when I was crying in the backseat of a Suburban going to treatment for what felt like the 400th time. It really wasn't. But crying and being really emotional about why can't I get this, right? Yeah. So when we think about all of the things that we have, like sort of that are problems and scary and issues with society, right? And I often think of the way we experienced COVID, it really highlighted those things. Isolation, inability to communicate. We don't know our neighbors anymore. There's no community. And all of those things combined, plus a lot of other stuff, right? I mean, there's lots, sure. Right? Sure. Trauma, genetics, all that stuff. But when you think about those two things, it really, really like lit a fire in me. If I can create something that has those components, I wonder if the efficacy rate would go up. And of course it does, right? Mm-hmm. Of course it does. Even all the literature says that, the studies that have been done about treatment. But, I think it's very interesting when we really start to boil it down, why is everyone struggling? Why is everyone depressed? Why is everyone anxious? My opinion, I think that we've got a big societal problem. And unless that is attended to, then it's going to be the tiger chasing its tail for the next centuries, because I did not know that what I was really looking for was connection.
Sure. Sure. Makes sense.
Yeah.
It does. And it's not that sexy. You see what I'm saying? It's like.
Yeah. I've seen it when I've gone and spoken with a lot of younger people going into classrooms, juniors and seniors, primarily in high school. And they're like, yeah, we're aware of a lot of this. Like, the younger people are a little more switched on than they get credit. I know we give them credit, but they're aware of what fentanyl is. But it's like, okay, what are my alternatives? Show me my alternatives. Show me, because a lot of these kids are like, oh, my parents were the ones that were freaking out and I couldn't participate in cheer anymore or volleyball or basketball, whatever it is. And so it was, like you said, that isolation, especially over these last 2-3 years.
Oh, yeah.
It took place. Still a lot of the paranoia, a new variant comes out. Everybody.
Disinformation. I mean, oh my gosh, country divide.
Yeah, it's just a topsy-turvy world. And it's hard to totally shine a light for them and say, well, get involved. You got to get connected. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And it's hard. I'm 45 and it's still hard for me sometimes.
Me too.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, at 559-579-1551, or visit us online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Pain Nonprofit. And please subscribe to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And if you would like to donate to PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, please click the link in the description to make your tax-deductible donation today and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.
I also think this, that, and all of us, I think, are going to agree on this. There is always, I'm not going to say always anymore.
Often?
Often there are reasons why we decide to pick up a drink, smoke a joint, do a line, do whatever it is when we are in those adolescent age groups.
And yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Now, but also that adolescent age group of 12 to 17 are also idiots.
True.
Okay. And again, this is just my opinion. That, to me, that age group, that is like, God, I hope this makes sense. That is kind of a natural progression from 12 to 17. You're supposed to be goofy. You're supposed to be uncomfortable. You're supposed to not know what to do when a girl looks at you. All right. You're not, oh, Jesus, first kiss. Well, now they just go right to it. But you know my point, right? We're awkward. We're all of those things. That's life. That's the natural progression of things. I think a lot of times parents will use the excuse of my child has ADD. My child was diagnosed with this, was diagnosed with that, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, they're just awkward kids, all right, that can't find their own you-know-what with both hands. And right. And it's no different than it was in 1910, 1920, 1930, 40, 50, 60, all the way up.
Right.
I think the availability of substances are so greater today. And it's so easy to obtain them anywhere you want at any time of the day, 24 hours a day. So when that kid does wind up having a problem with all of this, the parent is still, because I deal with this, the parent is still going, why, God, was my child born with this? And sometimes it's just a kid screwing up. But the problem with today is when kids just screw up, they're going to die.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same conversation with my son that I'm taking to college tomorrow. The last child I have 5 kids. He's the last one. He's going to college tomorrow. And I said to him, his name's Sheldon, I was like, his dad and I had the conversation, like, Sheldon, listen, we're real sorry, and this is a real bummer. But when we were in college and we were buying and doing drugs, there was sort of loyalty among thieves, right? I mean, we were never scared that somehow or another there was going to be fentanyl in this, joint that we bought from the guy down the road for $10 or whatever, right? Even cocaine, even pills that looked like that they had the label. And I was like, buddy, you know what? You just got to drink a beer. That's it. And never let it out of your hand. You know what I mean? And
there it is.
You cannot safely experiment with drugs these days.
Not at all.
It's just not a thing.
No.
And how weird is that?
Yeah. But see, they still think they can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's that invincibility thing where they're like not developed.
Right. Or they know their drug dealer, and by God, my drug dealer would never do that to me.
Yeah. Well, maybe not purposefully.
Right.
Yeah.
We've heard that 1,000 times.
Well, think about what we just came out with Michael K. Williams, the actor.
Yep.
He probably knew that guy that sold him the fentanyl that got just 10 years. I'm sorry. That's my opinion. Just 10 years. Someone's dead. Just 10 years.
Right.
Okay. If we did that in our car, we would have gotten a lot more than 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing too, I mean, this probably isn't a topic for this podcast, but it's just not a good business plan. I mean,
right. Yeah.
I mean,
he's been saying that for a long time.
I mean, it's kind of like a crude thing to say, but I felt like I could say that to y'all, and whoever's listening, just don't send me nasty emails. Just
no, it's true. No, it's true.
Everyone, people are dying, and that's terrible. And you don't even want to say this, but in like polite society, but like the whole business model of drug selling is addiction and repeated need, right? That's the model.
But here's my take on it. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you.
I really want someone to explain that to me. Like, what am I not thinking of?
Okay. There are, this is what nobody is understanding out there.
Okay.
We have more, I'm going to split it, drug users and addicts in this country than anybody realizes.
Okay.
So if I'm Mr. Drug Dealer here, and I've got a base of, I don't know, 50 customers,
Mm-hmm.
I already know there's 100 more of them behind them.
True.
That are coming my way. So I'm going to cut down my expenses by not going further and testing the drug and making sure it's all equal and making sure there's too much in there. I don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's somebody else behind the one. There's 10 people behind the one that just died.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to keep in mind, drug dealers don't have a soul. They don't care.
That's
they
true.
literally don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And so these kids, what I try to tell them is that you are a walking dollar sign to them. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. And if you die, oh well.
Yeah.
To me, it's that simple. You know.
So when you're talking about like controlling the expense, you're saying that with a tiny bit of fentanyl, it can be reconstituted so many times and it keeps like, you're not buying real opiates anymore, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We look, and we all know, we said something earlier, you know, about this has been around. Most of these drugs, have been around and were developed back in the 30s and 40s. Actually, Germany did it. Okay, Germany, they weren't idiots. You know, they're geniuses. They're so anal, but no, they developed they developed these opioids that have been sitting dormant for a long time, and now they have found these drug dealers and chemists. They have found these online. That's basically how the whole carfentanil thing got started, and right.
Yeah.
You know, so none of this is new. None of this is new. They've just exploited it to the point to where how do I put this? Again, they don't care if somebody lives or dies, because the United States, look, we use 99% of the world's opiate supply. That's a statistical fact.
Right.
We use 93% of the world's Vicodin supply.
Right.
If I'm China, if I'm Russia, if I'm somebody else, you don't think I'm going to exploit that?
Oh, I mean, there's lots of theories about that's what's actually happening now, you know, like destroying democracy from the inside out, basically, you know. And I do think that there's lots there with what you're saying. I do. And I've got two things I want to say. The first thing is, you know, if we go back to this idea about connection, right? That's not the end all be all. That's not just like the solution, because there's, you know, it's complicated. There's lots of other things that were compounded by COVID, right?
Right.
So I started in this business in 2009. Somewhere around 2016, 17, somewhere in there, you know, we were really in the midst of like the opiate crisis there. And we were really seeing for the first time lots of young people coming into treatment, right? Mm-hmm. And so that kind of rocks on for a couple of years. And then we started really seeing that the mental health acuity of the clients that we were admitting under, you know, substance use disorder licenses and treating for primary substance use disorder. I mean, it was like 50-50 though. The anxiety off the charts, the depression off the charts, more people being diagnosed as bipolar, way more personality disorders, anything from borderline personality disorder to oppositional defiance, I mean, attachment disorder, so many things that were going on. And so that was happening, right? And then COVID comes, and then we all go home for 2 years and watch the news 24/7 and, pick our side. Are we on Fox News side or are we on NBC News side? The country is divided, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's just been this trajectory that's been kind of coming down for, about 10 years now that makes this issue with addiction and alcoholism so much bigger than it was even when I was getting sober. I mean, I think it probably was always there, but there just wasn't so much light on it. There just wasn't so much, detail when we're publishing our data and, all kinds of state requirements for tracking who's coming into treatment and all that kind of stuff. But my point is, I think in the future, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the future, I think people and psychologists and sociologists will look back at this 10-year period in the lifespan of this country as the time when either one or two things is going to happen, right? The great debilitation or the great awakening, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know which one of those is going to come out of this. I know which one I'm fighting for, right? I know which one you are fighting for. But there's so many forces against what we're saying, and not only in the pharmaceutical world. It's there's so many economic layers to what we're talking about, and the saddest part of it is people that when I started my new platform just several months ago, the first program that I opened is a mental health primary program, and I did that on purpose because, in my opinion and my experience, that's where the greatest need is right now. Now, a lot of these people are treating their mental health with different, substances and stuff like that, so they can have co-occurring disorders, of course. But I think that, it's just been like that movie, The Perfect Storm. And, we're not over it yet, but we're kind of like when the hurricane passes and then you'll sort of like get those bands of storms that come behind it. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know this, that I do believe this. The only way that we're going to come out of it with sort of our country and our beliefs and our politics and our democracy and our, capitalism intact is if a lot of the different powerful entities start to come together to address this instead of addressing it in silos. One of the things that I'm working on right now is I'm creating an advisory board for my new company. And I'm just asking, some of the smartest people I know, the best physician, the best lawyer when it comes to, all kinds of HIPAA issues, et cetera. And just trying to bring everybody into the room together just under a very, this is like a Marsha Stone, microscopic little thing that I'm trying to do. But I think that it just may be part of a solution because, guys, I really feel this with my whole heart. We have got to find and at least tacitly agree on some kind of a plan, because this is getting worse and worse every year, every month, every day that I'm involved in it. And I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too philosophical, or maybe I'm just trying to put too many facts together, but that's the way it feels to me. It feels to me like we are on the edge of like a pandemic.
Yeah, we are. And look, just on a side note, you ever need somebody to help you with the opioid questions? I would be more than happy to participate in that with you. Because look, I'm not going to be as arrogant as I think I am and say I know everything, because I don't. All right. But there truly isn't much I don't know about the opioid issue, because that was me. But I want to go back. And by the way, I mean that. Okay.
But I'm serious right now. I mean, I said that. Let me be honest. I was being a little bit manipulative. I would love you guys to be a part of this. It's not a paid position, but I'm going to fly everybody to Austin a couple of times a year. And let's just sit in a room and think bigger than ourselves.
I love that. I love that.
Let me interrupt you real quick. Thank you for saying what you have, because so many people say I'm a conspiracy theorist. And I'm like, no, just add this shit up. Look at the cycle of our country, our life, the war on, quote unquote, war on drugs. You make me feel so much better about myself. See, I'm going to send people that clip alone and go, see, I'm not
crazy.
Right.
Sorry,
but that's okay. But I do want to say this, because you mentioned something about look, I am a big mental health proponent as well. Okay, let's not take that wrong. But I always have the question: is when were these people diagnosed? Were they diagnosed pre-addiction, middle of addiction, after addiction?
I agree.
How do you differentiate the person that is depressed when they're taking a depressive drug? How you see my point?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So how many of these diagnoses are actually authentic?
Well, mom and dad don't WebMD this and just go, my son clearly has this. My daughter has this too often. It's like, no, you're not a doctor. Right. Stop that.
Right.
Well, no, I get it. And I agree with what you're saying. One of the things that, we did with the long-term program, the first one that I built was, our logo was, we are med friendly, but we're not med pushers, meaning that a lot of people check into treatment and they're on 15 different prescription drugs and, all kind of stuff like that. I hear you and I agree with you. Now, I'm not a physician. I employ a lot of very smart ones and counselors and all that kind of stuff. But where is the difference? Where's the breaking point between, a mental health primary diagnosis and a primary substance use disorder diagnosis?
Right.
I mean, honestly, who the hell knows,
Right.
And who cares? It's like Mark Houston that I first worked for. He was my mentor, and I would ask him questions like, why? Everything was a why question. I was a young whippersnapper, right? He's like, Marsha, I don't give a shit how the car got in the ditch. Get the car out of the ditch. I'm like, get the car out of the ditch. That's a great point.
I love that line. I love that line. I don't give a shit how it got there.
That's what he said. That's a direct
funny.
But it's true, and here's the thing. And why did I decide to do the mental health primary thing? Because I think that there are a lot of people that are suffering. 90% of it is genetics and trauma response. And, it's that there's a lot of sort of gray area to get to the place you're not mental health primary, you're substance use disorder primary. But here's the truth. Going back to what we were first talking about with resources, let me ask you a question. Do you think that the major insurance companies in this country give you longer treatments for substance use disorder or mental health? Reimburse you better for substance use disorder or mental health?
Substance use.
Mental health.
Mental health.
Seriously.
Yeah.
We can't look, and I own a treatment center, and that shocks me because we can't even get people into mental health care here in California right now.
Well, listen, it is state by state, that's for sure. So let me caveat this.
Okay.
Where in Texas, and I have one.
By the way, I love Texas. I love everything about Texas. Okay, I should have been born in Texas.
Everybody in California does. They're all here now in Austin.
When you retire, I'm moving Payne to Texas.
Okay, perfect.
Listen, I love Texas. Here's the only I hate Texas in the summer, which is why I'm going to Colorado tomorrow. But the rest of the time, I love Texas. I'm not a Texan. I'm from Georgia originally, so I'm a Southern girl. But my husband's from Texas, so that's why we moved here. And it's a great state. I mean, it's been economically the most friendly state I've ever been involved with. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's lots of good reasons to have a business in Texas. We could talk about that another time. But what I'm saying is, more people are getting mental health diagnoses these days, and insurance companies are responding better to mental health diagnoses, right? And they are very intertwined. And back to the original point, we got to have enough time and resources to get the car out of the ditch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I just knew that from example from a friend who he's struggling with drinking, and I worked with them, and he's like, I don't know that an AA 12-step approach is for me. Cool. So he went to the local mental health clinic there, behavioral health. And it was like, I'm having a problem with drinking. And it was like, not much. But then he's like, I'm having depression and anxiety and some suicidal ideation. Boom. And then when he went in, finally met with the counselor, and it was like, oh, and you have this drinking problem on the side. Mm-hmm. It wasn't approached as, oh, if you clear this up first, then we can really deal with these issues. Let's deal with these issues. And when you do, it'll help with that drinking.
Exactly. And it will. And it will. But then you kind of go back to, but why were you drinking? What was going on before that? And there's all kinds of, there's the AA, we drink for the effect produced. There's, the genetic that talks about, genetic predictors and all that stuff. I was having dinner one night in California at the West Coast Conference, and I was sitting beside Michael Genovese. He's a brilliant man. I think he's like the chief psychiatric officer of like one of the big companies like Acadia or something. It's the only person I've ever met. He's like got an MD from Harvard and also a JD. And I'm like, you're just an overachiever. Like, let's go ahead and say that right now, right? But I did ask him, I was like, what causes alcoholism? What causes addiction? I mean, you want to like get a cocktail party, like stop dead? Ask that question, right?
Kid.
And he goes, right? And he goes, well, he explained it to me like there's a spectrum, right? There's genetics and there's societal and trauma. And somewhere along that pendulum, everybody falls at some point. Whether or not it looks more like mental health and substance use disorder, there's a direct correlation between the way that you were raised, basically, nature versus nurture, and mental health. But if there was not that much genetics and it was mostly like, behaviorally, like if you drink enough, anyone will get addicted sort of theory, then, that's going to look more like the standard case of alcoholism that we diagnose. And I was a little confused when he was first saying that. And again, sorry, Dr. Genovese, if you're listening, I probably said that all wrong. But the thing about it is what I really embraced and took away from that conversation is it's really impossible. It's impossible to come up with the definition or the solution because it truly is such an individualized thing. But then that brings me back to my first point, which is what I just always try to go for. Whenever I'm building a program, opening a business, like consulting for anybody, I always try to go back to make it as long-term as you can, right, and incorporate some kind of a spiritual component that everyone can agree on. Because you don't ever want that to be like, the sticking point.
Stumbling block.
Or, yeah, exactly. Like, you don't like to pray? Cool. Like go on a walk, and that's a walking meditation. Just anything that's going to get us to the point where we're willing to connect with others and connect with ourselves. Because if we don't do that, so many times I would like come out of treatment and they would recommend an IOP and an alumni meeting. And that went right out the, I probably like balled it up and threw it out the window, who knows? But when I got to the point, like you were talking about, that you were desperate and willing to do whatever became necessary, those are the two things that, like, as a common denominator, most people will agree that if you don't include some of that connection when you leave treatment, you're going to get uncomfortable enough that you're sort of like, the old part of your brain, sort of the prehistoric part of your brain is going to remember what it is that gives you some kind of relief and comfort. And I think that I don't think there's much to argue with that,
Right. Yeah. And I do believe in today's world, I know at least we do with our treatment centers. There's other treatment centers that have done it. It's not like when you and I got clean back, back when, right? Mm-hmm.
Shut up! Take the cotton out of your ears and stuff it in your mouth. And
right. That was a big one. That was a big one. But today, we are trying to get our clientele to connect and to do things with alumni groups and to go out. And there are it's fun. We're trying to get that message. It's okay and it's fun. Sobriety is okay and it's a fun thing.
Yeah. And I think that's critical. I think it's critical. I think a lot of treatment programs don't do it because it's not like there's no margin in that really.
Right.
But when you talk about like efficacy and, outcomes and stuff like that, to me, there's no argument there.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's going to be one of the greatest, I don't want to say quickest because every brain's different, but we've got to rewire our neural pathways, and it's all a part of that process. Yeah. And I'm going to guess that's a little bit what was in the Rewired workbook that you co-authored. There's a lot of that rewiring neural pathways. It's necessary. Like my girl, she didn't notice it till this morning, but I was brushing my teeth with my left hand. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, brushing my teeth. She's like, but you're not left-handed. And it's like, well, our mutual friend, who's a neuropsychologist, who's in a recovery, is like, brush with your left hand, and you're going to look yourself in the mirror. And I'm just sitting there and saying nice things, not verbally, because I don't want to be a hurrah. But it's those little things to just start to rewire and rework the brain a little bit.
Yeah, it's true. That's kind of like what I was talking about, with the spiritual muscle memory. And that workbook, this is like Marsha Stone junk science, but when we started doing our real continuum, right? Everyone would go to treatment for 90 days ish. And then they would go down into the sort of high accountability, sober living is what we called it. There was like someone there 24 hours. And then after they'd been there a couple of months and they were like actualized in their aftercare plan, they had a little part-time job, they had a sponsor, they were making all their medication refills, doing all those things. Then they could go to the apartments, and that was like sober apartments with more autonomy. But what I started noticing was that people would trip up over very similar things time and time again. And I just kind of started taking notice of that. That workbook has nothing to do with treatment, nothing to do with 12 steps. It has everything to do with things that might trip you up when you finish with treatment, basically.
Yeah.
And it was like, family boundaries and communication, financial sanity, like relationship sanity, and, all the different things. Because what happens, what I have seen a lot is people get out of treatment and they're either going to go like gung-ho to get their job back and get their career back on path, or they're going to like find Mrs. Right Now or Mr. Right Now and, the AA meeting across the room, and their heart goes pitter patter, and all of a sudden it's God's will, right? I mean, have you heard that before?
Oh, I can't tell you how many times. I can't tell you how many times. And here's the other thing, since you brought that up, look, I am a huge proponent of long-term aftercare, right? I'm a huge proponent of it all right? So sober living, all of it, all right? No relationships if you're not married, not even a girlfriend for that matter, or a boyfriend. But here's what I find a lot of the times. Is I find that the families actually get in the way of that person's recovery more than the actual person in recovery does.
Well, because they try to be like the recovery cops.
Either that or he's doing so well. I mean, I literally have had this. I can't tell you how many times. He's doing so well. He doesn't need sober living.
He looks great.
Everything's fine. I'm going, what's wrong with you? Okay. So again, my point here is, and again, not to be arrogant, for any of us to be arrogant, but we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We know what we're talking about. I'm not saying this to hear myself just talk. I'm not saying it to hear my own voice. This is critical. So my comment to a lot of parents is, look, your son or daughter better than I do. I know the drug addict better than you. And I know what he or she is capable of and what he or she is not capable of.
You know what I always say? Everybody asks me, like, what is it like being a lawyer versus being like, working in the rehab field? And I was like, well, when you're a lawyer, people come into contact with a problem and they come into your office and they pay you a bunch of money and you give them advice, and 9 times out of 10, they take it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in the rehab business, people call you when they have a problem. They come into your office, they give you a bunch of money, and then they say, F you when they get to the door, and they go and do whatever they were doing when they got here. And that is the biggest difference. Why? Because this disease tells us that we don't really have a problem and you're just trying to interfere. And if you've got mom and dad backing up that little story, game over.
That's
You cannot fight the disease and the family at the same time. I have always that, and to this day, that is something I will stand by.
Let me ask you both with this one, and Flindt, I already kind of know with you because Flindt does an awesome family meeting every Wednesday night. So, the parents coming in. And when I've eavesdropped in, I just see the continual rejection that the family members kind of view, oh, well, they got to change. not accepting, guess what? The whole family dynamic does. And this is going to have to be a totally different thing. And guess what, Uncle Bob, you may not be able to have beer on Thanksgiving just to help out little Susie or whatever it is and be there and be supportive. And, I personally see that. And Flindt, I've seen you deal with it. So just kind of wanted the opinion there that sometimes that's the hardest thing is good. They're great. They're 30 days. We don't have to change shit and move on. Right.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
They see what they don't understand. Let's just take that scenario real quick. What they don't understand, let's take Thanksgiving, right? I'm not an alcoholic, even though I did my fair share of drinking in college and everywhere else. Okay. But you've got somebody that's 22 years old. They've been in treatment. They're an opiate addict. They're now in recovery. It's Thanksgiving. They have 6 months in of recovery time. And the family is serving alcohol for Thanksgiving. I'm not saying that they can't serve it for the rest of their eternity on Thanksgiving. I'm saying for the next 2 to 4 years, don't do it. Okay. Because what the family doesn't understand, and it's funny how fast how manipulative we are, right? Because I can walk by that table without anybody seeing me in front of everybody. And I could down that glass of wine before anybody even saw me do it. Yeah. See, they're not understanding. They're not understanding the addiction part of it. They're not understanding what triggers our brains. They're not understanding that love affair that we have with this, the manipulation side, all of it. And that it takes 2 to 4 years for that brain to even begin to heal, okay, in order to recognize some of these things that we're doing. It's like the lady that came in here one time. Her daughter was a meth addict. They wound up taking her to the hospital because of meth sores, right? And they gave her a bottle of Vicodin to take home, like 50 of them, right? Which is stupid to begin with. But so the mom calls me and says at Flindt, she goes, I think my daughter got into the pills. There's like 4 of them missing. And I went, well, why don't you, because I'm making my point with her. I go, bring them over here. Let's talk about it. She brings the pills over. I said, let's count them up. And so I spread them out on my desk. I take a pen. I start counting them like this. And she's sitting right here. And I said, no, there's not 4 missing. There's 8 missing. Yeah, he's got to do that because I'm all over the place. So there's 8 missing. I go, let's count them again. She goes, how is that even possible? I count them up again. There's 8 missing. She goes, I don't understand. I go, there. I go, there's the other 4. Yeah. Families don't get it, is my point.
They don't. They don't. And it's so confusing because we clean up pretty well, I can't even tell you the amount of people said to me, like, you don't look like an alcoholic. Like, you don't look like a drug addict. Right. And I'm like, why? Because I have on a blazer and like my hair is clean. Like, what are we talking about here? I mean, right. But it's, it's hard, and it is a family disease. There's no question about that. I agree. My husband is a veterinarian, like I said, and he went to some kind of like CE, like a continuing education thing, but it was like the ethics thing, and it was about drugs and alcohol and stuff. And the professor that was presenting was talking about sort of, the new brain and then the old brain, right? And, the old brain, we breathe without thinking about it. We're going to, procreate as, like a matter of, we're going to eat, whatever. And he was using this example with, if we went swimming and someone held my head underwater for long enough time, what's going to happen? Well, how do people drown? They drown because at the last minute, they take that desperate last gasp for air and their lungs fill up with water. Now, while you're underwater, I did not think, oh my God, I forgot I'm a fish. I'm not a mammal, I'm a fish all this time. It wasn't that I thought that, my brain just thought relief, right? And his point was, it's the same way with relapse, right? It's the same way with relapse, because what happens is if we get to that level of uncomfortability, our old brain reminds us that glass of wine that you just talked about that's sitting right there, very convenient, that pill that I'm going to take right there, you didn't forget the consequences. You didn't forget all the bad shit that happened when you did that last time before, but that little 10 seconds of relief that you might feel somehow or another, your old brain decides that it's worth it. Right. And to me, like, if my husband was telling the story, he could tell it way better because he's a scientist, but even without all the right names, you guys see what I'm saying, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well said.
You have to understand, like, this is like a desperate act to survive. And when we really talk about relapse in that way, then to me, it takes a lot of the argument out of it, right? I mean, well, I haven't chose to take a drink in a very, very, very long time, right? I'm not going to argue at the beginning. I did, sure. But it's been a very long time since my, executive functioning had anything to do with me relapsing or like drinking or taking some other substance into my body. And really, I love that, because when we get to the point that our brain has healed enough that you're not in that sort of like rinse and repeat of your sort of reptilian brain, then you're to the point where you can have, like you said, 2, 3, 4 years down the road at Thanksgiving, it's not going to be on you like it's on you at 6 months.
Right.
You don't need that.
Said.
You can find that gasp of air somewhere else 2, 3, 4 years down the road that you can't find at 6 months. And I think that if people could just really understand and respect that, I think families would get a lot less, smack talking, which I'm hearing.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
The other thing too is like, people that are not alcoholic don't like fight for their right to drink.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean?
Yeah, I do.
They don't care.
They don't care.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
That's
good.
That is
no,
good.
Absolutely.
That's funny.
I had a flash of a lot of past memories right there when you said that. Like, wow, I put a lot of effort into that. The go to a different bar that people don't know you, hang out with different friends, Oh man.
You gotta fight for that, right?
Marsha, if people want to find out more about you, maybe even the Rewired workbook, all the amazing work you're doing, what's the easiest way?
I've got a website, marshastone.com, and all the companies and media and stuff like that is on there. Foundationstone.com is our new platform program. I don't know if that website is out yet. This is crazy. Like this thing has like come together so quickly, and I'm very, very grateful. But I know that marshastone.com is up and running, so that's the best way. And if anyone wants to email me, it's marsha@marshastone.com. I'm trying to play to the 6-month crowd and the 4 and 5 year crowd, right? Yeah. So Marsha Stone, that's all you got to remember. You can find me.
Perfect.
But you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for letting me come hang out with y'all. My day's feeling exponentially better right now. I was kind of like,
well, after standing in line at CVS, I mean, what do you expect, right?
I mean, sometimes it's just like, well, remember that Seinfeld,
Serenity now. Right? Marsha, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. It really has. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And I'm going to give you guys a call for sure about when I'm putting the advisory board together. I'd love for you guys to be a part of that. And it means a lot to me that you said that. So thank you.
Absolutely. We would love to help out any way we can.
And if you ever want to come to Austin, call me. I recommend you do it like October through April, but you do you.
You got it.
I'm aiming. This right here is a Lewis Hamilton sweatshirt. So one of these days I will make the Formula One race. One of these days.
All right, guys. Y'all are amazing. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Marsha. We'll talk soon.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, at 559-579-1551, or visit us online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Pain Nonprofit. And please subscribe to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And if you would like to donate to PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, Please click the link in the description to make your tax-deductible donation today and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.